So South Park just released its newest special, and as usual, I am substantially late to covering it, but at this point I think you guys would be more surprised if I was on time, so we don't really have to talk about it. They started teasing this special a few weeks back, and in typical South Park fashion, it was clear that they weren't straying away from the hot button issues of today. They were going after Ozempic, the hottest new trend in weight loss. And what better show to tackle a weight loss craze than the show that has one of the most iconic fat kids of all time? Now, what we all expected was for South Park to make fun of this new weight loss trend and make some topical jokes along the way. You know, that's what they usually do. What I didn't expect was a scathing commentary of the US healthcare system, pharmaceutical companies, sugar companies, and even Lizzo. And of course, all of these things are equally evil. So instead of me yapping for an unreasonably long time like I usually do for these intros, let's get to talking about crop tops, skinny Cartman, and mascots for cereal dying gruesome deaths. This is how South Park brutalized healthcare, Big Pharma, and Lizzo. The episode begins with a disclaimer about the use of real audio of Trey Parker using an obesity drug, which is funny because I always talk about how Matt and Trey do insane amounts of research into the topics they cover, but Trey really took it to the next level with this one. I mean, he gained a bunch of weight just so that he could know firsthand what it's like to use Ozempic. Now that's a man who's committed to his craft. So the episode begins with Cartman at a checkup, and the doctor reminds him that his weight is very unhealthy.
I think it's time for some drastic measures to bring down his weight.
Oh god, here we go with this shit again.
You see, this is nothing new to Cartman. He's gone through this several times before, but he's never actually showed any interest in losing weight. Even when he gets sent to fat camp back in season 4, the only thing he shows any interest in was profiting off of his fellow campers by running a black market for snacks. But Cartman has had many years to change as a person, and when the doctor tells him that he could not be fat anymore, he is overjoyed at the thought. Now, since it's Cartman, it's not because of the health or self-esteem benefits that losing large amounts of weight would bring, but rather because he wants to be able to freely insult people. You see, Cartman is delusional enough to believe that literally the only flaw he has is his weight, so if he weren't fat, he could say awful things to people and they would have nothing to respond with.
Hello there, Pakistan! Your whole country is f***ing dumb, and it smells like ass!
Well, you are a normal person! You are very average looking!
This was a pretty clever way to give Cartman the motivation to lose weight, and it plays out even better as the episode continues. The problem is, it's $1,200 a month for the medication, which Cartman's mom would never be able to afford. So instead of Ozempic, the doctor offers a substitute for the medication.
All right. I'm gonna write you a prescription for Lizzo. She's a really good singer who talks about body positivity and just being happy with the way you look.
As it turns out, Lizzo is less of a medication and more of a mindset. Now, if you don't know who Lizzo is, which apparently is very possible considering the amount of comments I've received from viewers who claim to be in their 50s and 60s, so shout out to all the viewers old enough to be my parents, Lizzo is a rapper who often preaches body positivity and self-love. Hence why they use her name to represent the idea of body positivity as a whole. They evolved this joke throughout the special, and Lizzo even recorded her reaction to a fake commercial they make for it, which we'll talk about later on. We then cut to a montage of real-life media coverage of Ozempic backed by a folk version of the South Park theme song.
Well, I'm going down to South Park, gonna have myself a time.
Which I was really happy to hear. Funnily enough, I was just thinking about how we haven't had any changes to the theme song in a while now, so it was pretty refreshing to hear this change up. This whole intro really feels like the opening to a documentary, which is kind of fitting since I always see tweets claiming that South Park is basically a documentary at this point. But we open at Tegrity Farms, where Randy is arguing with Shelly about wearing a crop top to school.
And I don't want my innocent little daughter going to school dressed like a whore.
Shelly decides to ignore Randy and go to school anyways, and Randy leaves us with a piece of wisdom that will definitely not be relevant throughout this special.
If you walk around wearing a shirt that exposes your belly, you end up with a bad group of people doing a bunch of drugs.
Sharon goes to get some coffee and is chatting with Wendy's mom about it, who brings up the fact that all of the moms are using Ozempic and wearing crop tops to show off their stomachs. As she says this, Butters and Craig's moms walk up doing exactly that. They're unwilling to admit to actually using these drugs though, and Butters' mom only admits it when the others do. The rest of the moms discuss the upcoming party where they all get together and use Ozempic, and Butters' mom decides to stop by. At school, Cartman is absolutely distraught at not being able to afford Ozempic, and Butters decides to ask Kyle for help. Cartman tells Kyle the situation, giving us a line that perfectly summarizes the American healthcare system and one of the major messages of the whole special.
Rich people get Ozempic, poor people get body positivity.
Despite his better judgment, Kyle decides to try to help Cartman by taking him to his insurance company, which is straight out of a sci-fi movie. That is, until they reveal that they want to file a claim, and they're directed to a wing that's a bit less impressive.
Hello.
They argue with the man in the claims department, who is essentially the sloth from Zootopia, and he tells them about how they might be able to get it covered if they do one simple thing.
So all you have to do is navigate the American healthcare system.
We then get a montage of the boys doing just that, backed by an original song from Butters.
We're gonna navigate the American healthcare system. It's there for you and me.
Just fill out these forms.
This is probably my favorite part of the entire special, just because it's so real. As someone who has recently entered adulthood and begun dealing with this kind of stuff, it's almost too real. Like, we all know how South Park likes to take things to the extreme for the sake of comedy, but this quite literally is not an exaggeration. This is literally what it's like to try to get anything done through the US healthcare system. Some of you know this, but a lot of you probably don't, but I'm actually a registered nurse outside of YouTube, specifically a psychiatric nurse, and the situations that I see from patients every day are honestly worse than even this over-the-top comedic portrayal. Psychiatric patients especially are likely to be forgotten about or forced to jump through countless hoops by insurance companies, assuming they even have insurance at all, which most of them don't. It's an incredibly sad situation that countless people in the US suffer from every day, and quite frankly, it's hard to see any way out of it with the way that the healthcare system is so deeply intertwined with insurance and pharmaceutical companies, creating a feedback loop that just funnels money into their pockets while leaving people dying or financially destroyed. And now that my ranting has backed me into an awkward, sad corner, let's go back to the funny cartoon. But yeah, this scene is pretty hilarious, especially as it gets more and more complicated until it eventually devolves into confused chaos, placing Butters in an M.C. Escher painting and even in the Tesseract from Interstellar. Meanwhile, Randy goes to pick up Shelly from school while wearing a crop top to try to get back at her, when Tweek's mom takes notice of Randy's outfit and begins to suspect that he might share a secret with her.
You're into the drugs?
Well, yeah, I'm into drugs.
Randy's complete misunderstanding of the situation leads to him being invited to Craig's mom's house, where they have parties where they all use Ozempic together. Randy shows up ready to rage, but quickly becomes concerned when he doesn't recognize the drugs they're using. And we all know that if Randy, of all people, is questioning using a drug, it's gotta be completely foreign to him. Also, quick side note, they mentioned that Wendy's mom brought the drugs, and they refer to her as Alexis, and I'm pretty sure that this is the first time they've ever even mentioned her first name, so that's cool, I guess. But as we all expected, Randy ends up taking the Ozempic, and he parties with the moms all night. The next morning, he notices a suspicious lack of a hangover as well as an appetite. He has a conversation with Towley about it, where he mentions all the benefits of this seemingly miracle drug.
Last night, I was partying with 9 hot MILFs, and this morning I woke up and guess what? I don't feel like total shit.
Meanwhile, the rest of the boys get Stan and Kenny to get in on their new plan to create their own Ozempic by ordering powdered supply in bulk from India and mixing it themselves. And Kyle discusses how he learned about all of this through only the most reliable resources.
Who needs hospitals and insurance when we have TikTok and YouTube?
Sharon begins to notice some strange changes in Randy and asks if he's using Ozempic, to which Randy responds by gaslighting her enough to throw her off the trail while simultaneously shaming her enough to get her to question her own body. Afterwards, he throws on his crop top and heads to another party, but when he gets there, he finds out they're all out of drugs. So, like some true junkies, they decide the easiest way to get their hands on some is to rob a pharmacy. They head over in their disguises, which are totally inconspicuous, and they're in and out in no time. One of my favorite running gags throughout the episode is the fact that not only are the women showing off their stomachs at all times, but they're literally like always posing like a model to better show them off. Even Randy begins to do it, striking a pose as he leaves the pharmacy. It's pretty hilarious. So the rest of the boys decide it's time to test their homemade Ozempic on Cartman, who tests if it works in the only way that he knows how.
Get me some Cocoa Puffs. What? I need to make a cereal bomb. Get me Cocoa Puffs, Captain Crunch, and a bucket of KFC. Hurry!
He's unable to finish his cereal bomb, something that has never happened before, and with that, the boys know that their experiment is a success. Honestly, this is one of the most underrated running gags in South Park, that Cartman is essentially some kind of food scientist who invents and names the most horrific combinations of junk food imaginable. Some of my favorites include powdered donut pancake surprise, toaster pastry chocolate milk mix butter bar, fried chicken sundae, and the legendary chocolate chicken pot pie. Because of their success, Kyle makes a vow to begin working for the greater good.
Now we're gonna make a whole lot more. We're not gonna just help Cartman. We're gonna help everyone in America who can't afford obesity drugs.
then cut to a mafia-looking guy sitting at a table discussing how the sugar industry is taking a big hit due to the rise of these obesity drugs. And as the scene continues, we begin to get an idea of why this matters so much to them.
But now obesity drugs are making people less cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
We're talking a 60% hit to the business.
The table is full of mascots for sugary cereals and snacks, smoking cigars, and drinking wine like mob bosses. This is another one of my favorite parts of the special since it's a hilarious way to represent the sugar industry as a whole. I also think it's an important thing to include since a lot of people still aren't aware of the fact that the obesity epidemic is essentially a direct result of the incredible amounts of sugar in everyone's food, which only gets them more and more addicted to food. For example, did you know that in the 60s, sugar companies funded studies that concluded excess fat was the most dangerous part of the typical diet, leading to the craze of low-fat food that spanned for decades, and in many of these foods they replaced the fat with sugar, causing the sugar consumption per capita to increase by over 30%. And completely unrelated, here's a graph that represents the percentage of Americans who are obese over the years. I'll let you come to your own conclusions. There's a bunch more information that is pretty easy to find about how Big Sugar has a hand in almost every big industry and politics in the US, but I value my life, so I'll leave it at that. And for the record, I am not currently, nor have I ever had any thoughts of ending my own life. Just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, I love using these cartoon mascots as mob bosses. It's a hilarious way to portray the sugar industry and just how influential they are. Meanwhile, Cartman continues to dream about all the horrible things he'll say to people once he's skinny.
You want to know what else, Pakistan? Your haircuts are dumb and that's why your women cover their heads. Yeah.
He finds out that he's lost almost 2 pounds in a week and the business is in full swing. Everything's going very well for the boys until they are robbed by the moms and Randy. Meanwhile, Sharon discusses how she started a new drug for people who can't afford obesity drugs, transitioning smoothly into an ad.
It's Lizzo. In case studies, 70% of patients on Lizzo no longer cared how much they weighed.
I don't give two shits.
It's Lizzo.
It parodies the Ozempic commercials that we've all seen a million times, and it's a pretty hilarious way to highlight the idea of body positivity. As I mentioned earlier, Lizzo actually reacted to this scene, and there were some pretty funny moments in her reaction.
That's crazy. Guys, my worst fear has been actualized. I've been referenced in a South Park episode.
We then find out Cartman has given up on the medication and is crafting a food creation so diabolical it would make Matt Stoney weep.
It's a cereal bomb, but topped with Twinkies and gravy. He said it's called an Oppenheimer.
Kyle then gives him a pep talk to snap him out of it, further exciting all of the Kaiman stans. In fact, this whole episode kind of felt like fan service for all the Kaiman shippers. Don't worry, I'm sure one day it'll be canon. We then cut to the Indian factory that's producing the semi-glutides, and the mascots sneak in and commit a surprisingly disturbing and realistic act of terrorism, but it's hard to deny that it's pretty hilarious to watch these childhood icons doing such terrible things. When the boys learn of the news, Cartman loses his hope entirely and ends up making the most dangerous creation known to man.
Cartman's in there with a cereal bomb that he says is 10 times more destructive than an Oppenheimer. He says it's called a Stormy Daniels.
They're able to talk him out of it once again, and Kyle reveals that he's found another supplier. Said supplier is then stopped by some construction workers with suspiciously short shirts and flat stomachs. Earlier, Randy had come to the realization that he had become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. In a bad group of people, doing a bunch of drugs.
And because of this, he makes a spur-of-the-moment decision and takes off with the drugs.
You're bad people! I'm gonna get the f*** away from you!
It quickly turns into a Mad Max-style chase scene, leading Randy directly to the boys. He explains the situation to them quickly.
I should have never worn this midriff shirt to school! Certain things just aren't appropriate to wear!
Honestly, this joke throughout the episode kind of just feels like Trey Parker trying to push this message to his daughter through the most extreme examples, and that makes it a lot funnier to me. Pretty soon, all the mascots get involved in the car chase, and it only gets crazier. Tony the Tiger even goes as far as to bring back an old classic.
Tony the Tiger killed Kenny!
This ended up being a pretty hilarious chase scene. One thing I was really impressed with was the 3D animation. Honestly, this might have been the best South Park has ever looked in 3D. They somehow managed to match the South Park art style almost perfectly, but with that extra dimension, and it's perfect for this scene, and it just looks amazing. I'm sure a big part of that was the extra time they got for these specials, so I hope that this 3D can be utilized at least for future specials. I also love how perfectly they characterize all of the boys in the scene. Stan is unwilling to shoot at anyone, but Kyle is more than willing, which perfectly highlights the difference in their characters I've talked about in the past. How Kyle is more willing to be the bad guy if he believes it's for the right reasons, whereas Stan is more likely to be performative in his actions and is very rarely willing to act on what he actually believes. Butters is stuck in the least enviable position of all of them, being stuck outside and having to hold on to the side of the truck, and his naivety even shines through when he can't believe that his mother would have lied to him about doing Pilates. Cartman's horrible selfishness is of course the reason that they're all in this position in the first place, and they even kill Kenny. I mean, everyone is playing their role absolutely perfectly. Eventually, Cartman crawls up on the hood to try to grab some of the Ozempic, and this is the moment where I realize that he's been wearing a hospital gown for the entire episode, because I immediately thought about the fact that he's giving everyone in the truck a pretty unfortunate view. They eventually lose all of their pursuers, and when they finally open the truck, they're shocked by what they find.
Hello.
When Randy eventually returns home, he finds Sharon just as she's about to use Ozempic. They have a heart-to-heart where they discuss how they feel about these drugs, and in a very rare moment, they end it on a happy note, with a pretty good message.
You are so much cooler than any other woman out there, you know that? And I do not want you to change one bit.
You know, I'm so used to Sharon hating Randy that it was honestly shocking to see them actually treating each other well, and it was pretty refreshing. I thought it was good. Back at school, Kyle comes to the conclusion that all of these different forces trying as hard as they can to make money off people's health makes it nearly impossible for most to actually be responsible for being fat. He's able to convince the rest of the school to stop making fun of people for being fat, and that's exactly what Cartman was looking for the whole time.
Hello, ma'am, you got a big nose. Hey, do I know you? F you.
The special ends with Cartman boarding his flight to Pakistan and flying off into the sunset, backed by the legendary track Free Ride. This was honestly the perfect way to bring the Cartman plot full circle, and I thought it was a hilarious way to end it.
I've got a lot of catching up to do.
This turned out to be such a fantastic special. I was a bit confused at first because in the past they've been releasing the seasons before they released the specials, but this time they released the special before the season. But honestly, I think it ended up being a pretty good move. It ended up capturing pretty much everything that makes a South Park episode good. It was topical, it was satirical, and it was funny. And something that was especially impressive to me was the fact that they were able to include pretty much every single main character that's in the show, while making sure that all of them played an important role in the episode. And it just felt incredibly natural. Everyone felt like themselves. It didn't feel like anyone was being forced to play a specific role, or anyone was just there without actually having an important role in the story. It just worked perfectly, and I think that's kind of one of the main things that makes a really good South Park episode. I've noticed a lot more recently that they tend to focus episodes more heavily around 2 or 3 characters at a time instead of all the characters. And I think when they can find ways to tell a story that includes all of the characters in a natural feeling way, I think that's kind of what makes it feel like classic South Park. For the past few years, I've constantly wondered why the show doesn't feel fully like old South Park. It just feels like something's always been different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And come to think of it, I think that might be part of it. Most of the best South Park in recent years has come from episodes or specials that do just that. For example, the post-COVID specials do this better than anything South Park has done in a long time, and in my opinion, they're probably the best thing South Park has made in the last 10 years. So it's no surprise that I ended up really loving this special. It checked off pretty much every box that makes for a good South Park episode. It even managed to generate some slight controversy with the whole Lizzo thing, and I think that controversy in South Park is kind of an indicator of how well the show is running. All around, I thought it was pretty great. It had some incredibly funny moments, and if I had to rank it, I'd probably put it either in the top of A tier or the bottom of S tier. Haven't really decided yet, but it was great.
Now, instead of obesity drugs, people have to rely on good things like self-esteem and body positivity. They're great!